Mambo African family. My name is Team Africa Worldwide. I am the spokesman for We Charge Colonialism. We Charge Colonialism is an organization that is highlighting the fact that Africans in America are in a colonial situation as defined by the United Nations when they describe what internal colonialization looks like. We are working towards self-determination. Two of our initiatives right now is to obtain membership to the African Union, and we also have the Justice Bank Initiative, which is a mutual aid society in which will provide assistance for family members who run into legal trouble with bails and legal services. Today's program is called Why Black Organizations Fail. And so we will be discussing several organizations, the United Negro, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the Black Panther Party, Black Lives Matters, um, and several others, just discussing the strengths and the weaknesses. And at this time, I'm going to allow my distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Attorney Cherie.
Hi everyone, Tierney Cherie. I'm on TV, and essentially I'm here as the steering committee chair of WCC, and that's basically a background on me.
Okay, Brother Frank.
Yeah, how you doing, everyone? My name is Frank, and member of this organization called the BCC, and one of the spokesperson, and also the chair for the political committee action plan.
Okay, and Brother Dwayne.
I'm Dwayne Nomowale. I'm a Pan-Africanist activist and historian who's written several books on the history and the struggles of African people throughout the diaspora.
Okay, Brother Jamal.
Peace, everybody. Jamal. I'm part of the public relations team. I've been part of WCC since it came to existence, I believe, in late December. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I do a lot of programs in the city, and I'm looking forward to a great chat that's about to transpire.
Okay, and Dr. P. Dr. Penderhugh, are you there?
You're muted.
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself. You have to turn on your camera and also your mic. Okay, you're doing it. You just keep clicking it. Your mic should be on. You just have to turn your camera on now. Okay, Dr. P, say something now.
It's like he got booted off.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that, people. Some people are saying in the comments that they hear an echo. Who's echoing? Is it everybody? Deja, I see you online. Anytime you want to jump in, just let us know, and someone will exchange places with you. Okay, so we're going to start with the organizations discussing, why they didn't do better. We're not going to say that they failed, but they could have accomplished more. We got the UNIA. Who would like to start with that organization and explain what they could have done better?
I can jump in. Looks like I'm actually the one that's echoing. You guys hear me okay?
I hear you okay.
Okay, I
Yeah.
thought I heard an echo. Anyone in the comments, if you see an echo, please say so. Hear an echo, please say so. As far as the UNIA, I think that number one, they had more than any other organization in the history of the United States. It was the most successful African organization. It was far more successful when you look at the actual things they were able to accomplish. The UNIA, in the short time that it existed, was able to launch a newspaper. They were able to buy several ships. They were able to really capture the minds and the hearts of Black America in a time that we were coming out of a philosophy of essentially assimilation. You know, that was what Black liberation looked like. No one, there were previous people who were Pan-Africanists who did point to going back to Africa, but overwhelmingly the dialogue at the time, especially following Booker T. Washington's success, the dialogue and the talk at the time was more so trying to get along without being so aggressive. And so the UNIA kind of took a really different path. And their path was to say that we're not going to try to emulate white society. We're going to more so look to Africa, and we're going to build our own institutions. We're not going to try to integrate into the white man's institutions. So just from that standpoint, to me, they came in with a very strong philosophy, and they really did capture the minds of Africans throughout not just the United States, but throughout the world. For that reason, I would say that more than any other organization that we're probably going to discuss today, I believe that the UNIA is probably the most successful, just because of the effect that Marcus Garvey was able to have on Pan-Africanism long after he's been passed away. As far as the issues that might have led to the organization's demise, so from my perspective, I think that number one, Marcus Garvey, while he was a very great man, he also was not someone he was someone that tried to take on everything on his own. And he did not necessarily delegate responsibilities in the organization. More so were areas where he didn't have expertise. For example, a lot of the ships that were purchased by the UNIA turned out to be basically not well crafted or very old. They were not able to do a lot with the ships, for example. There were just different areas whenever you read about the organization where, because he was not able to delegate responsibilities to people who had certain expertise, the organization didn't do as well as it could have done. I think the other thing, and this is something I'm sure we're going to see as a theme in a lot of Black organizations, is that the personality of the person leading the organization overshadows the organization. And when that person is no longer present, the organization fades. That's like a common theme with our liberation movements. You'll have one person that's the star, so to speak. And whenever that person's no longer there, they could be assassinated. In Marcus Garvey's case, he was deported. Whatever happens, essentially there's a void, you know. So that was a need to me. There was a need to me for him to cultivate people to step in if he was taken out. So, you know, those are just my perspectives. I'm sure you guys will have a lot more to add to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say I agree with that 100%. And I think that was the main issue with the UNIA, is that Garvey was such a powerful personality that he kind of overshadowed everyone else within the organization. So what happened was, when he was deported from the United States, the organization weakened in the United States without him. But when he went back to Jamaica, went back to the Caribbean, was organizing the UNIA in the Caribbean, it was still very strong there because Garvey was there to build a movement. And then ultimately what happened was, when Garvey died, the organization, the UNIA itself, you know, kind of faded in influence. And there are multiple different groups claiming to be the true successor of Marcus Garvey. You know, there's multiple different branches of the UNIA, but the UNIA has never really been able to recapture the influence and the strength that it had in Garvey's time. And I think it's a testament to what Garvey's doing, that even though his organization wasn't as influential after he passed, his ideas were very influential. And just about any Pan-African leader that you can name who came after Garvey, whether it's Kwame Nkrumah, Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, Walter Rani, you know, all across the diaspora, all across the continent, all of those leaders were influenced by Garvey in some way. A lot of people don't even realize Martin Luther King looked to Garvey in some sense as a source of influence. So Garvey as an individual influenced many different organizations and leaders that came after him. But I think if you look at the UNIA as an organization, the great weakness is that because so much of it was centered around the personality of Garvey, that it diminished in influence when Garvey wasn't around. And that is a common theme that we say throughout Black organizations, including some of the organizations that we'll be speaking about. But we sought out to the Nation of Islam when Elijah Muhammad died. The Nation of Islam fell apart, and there's different branches of the Nation of Islam now. One of which Farrakhan runs, but there's different branches. So just throughout our history, we see a recurring theme of when an individual leader dies, the organization either breaks up or it's no longer as effective. And I think the UNIA is probably the first example where we see that happening.
You know what's so amazing about the UNIA? It is the largest mass movement of Black people in the history of the diaspora, if not the world. You know, I say at least in recent history. You know, within the last 100 years. You know, they said they had an estimated 13 million people worldwide. You know, with America having the strongest tie. They said that his newspaper, I believe it was Negro World, was so powerful that if it was caught, if a person in Africa was caught with it, they would be killed. You know, and one thing I find amazing is even though Marcus Garvey wasn't that long ago, he was wiped out the history book. Despite having an estimated 13 million people, you know, a lot of our kids, a lot of our elders don't even know who he is. I had to learn about him when I first went to college. You know, I didn't hear about him in the traditional K through 12. You know, so I think it speaks volume to the power that he had, that they kind of wiped him out because they knew the influence in which he had among our people. And this is why you look at the NOI, how they kind of copy his practices. You know, the only main difference was that they added Islam, you know, and made it more of a religious base. But, you know, a lot of the people within the NOI organization at the time, you know, back in Elijah Muhammad time, you know, credited Marcus Garvey for the inspiration. Even they used to have Marcus Garvey Day within the NOI. So that speaks volume to the work that he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I can add to that as well. I think one of the problems of the UNIA, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, all right. One of
We
the
can hear you
problems
fine.
of the UNIA was that I kind of view Marco Garvey like a traditional man, like a traditional entity. Was when I say traditional man, I'm not saying in the negative term, but he was the man traditionally who like kind of took his stand. I think he didn't believe that freedom tomorrow, but he believed that freedom today. Like he wanted that freedom. He wanted everything at that point of time, like in his lifetime. So I don't think he was thinking that freedom might be tomorrow, but he was kind of focusing on freedom today within this generation. And on the other hand, W.E.B. Du Bois was also kind of thinking about freedom today, but he was also thinking about building the cadre in the sense that educating the younger generation that just in case if they leave, there will be people who will step back, that will believe in the philosophy, that will believe in the ideology of the organization of the movement to continue with the movement. And Garvey, on the other hand, was not really thinking about that. He was just kind of straightforward person. And I believe at this kind of a critical time point in history, he and W.E.B. Du Bois, couldn't get on one agreement because he wanted it at that point, and W.E.B. Du Bois was saying we need to educate the masses. And that was one critical point area where the organization failed its mission. Because in order for an organization to still into being or in existence, you have to be able to train out the younger one to come. You know, there's an African proverb that say, the younger one are the future generation, but they never educate or they never prepared the younger generation. So that was one area that the UNIA really have an issue, because after W.E.B. Du Bois left and Marco Garvey left, and it became a problem because there was no one to stand up.
Okay, I thank all the panelists for their contributions on that question. Before we go to the next question, do a little bit of housekeeping. When you are not the person speaking, we all have to mute our mics because that's causing some feedback. I'm hearing in the comments, and somebody has a squeaking noise that's going on, and so that squeak is being picked up into the mics. The next organization that we want to discuss is the NAACP, the National Organization of the Progress of Colored People. I think that's what the initials stand for. And they're still around, and that was the organization that was the go-to organization when I was young. You just had to belong to that. But then as I got older, I learned that that was probably something we didn't control. But I'm the host and I'm not a panelist. So, uh, Queen T, you want to pick that one up?
Okay. And anyone, let me know if my sound's not right. So the NAACP, I was actually in the NAACP when I was in college. That was my first time in a Black organization. And the thing that I was quickly frustrated with was the organization, number one, has so many coalitions with groups that are not non-African, and to me, their interests have become compromised because of that. We know traditionally that the NAACP was essentially founded for the purpose of obtaining integration. We can see that if that as their goal has not been attained. But then a lot of us even question whether or not integration is what we want. So because of that, there's always going to be a conflict with whether or not the organization is really set up to actualize anything as far as our progress, because the question is America ever going to integrate Black people? So, but just my overall impression of the NAACP, just to wrap it up, is that it's an organization that has a lot of connections with groups outside the Black community, and that to me is the biggest weakness of the organization. They're not going to speak out boldly. Because of that, a lot of their donors, for example, are people who are affiliated with the Democratic Party. A lot of their members are politicians. So they just have a lot of allegiances outside of the Black community, and I think that has watered them down.
Okay, I want to contribute to the positives or shortcomings of the NAACP.
Frank, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me? All right. So I think adding to that, I think what Tian said, that is exactly true. And I just want to add to that as well. I think one of the reasons why the NAACP failed is because they took or they keep taking their issues or their problem to the wrong entity for judgment. So how can you be fighting a system that is causing your problem, or that is the problem to your situation, and then at the same time take your issue to the court system of that entity? So I think it was one of the reasons why Malcolm X saw it unnecessary and said that the only way Black people, some of the issue of Black people will be solved is Black people or African people have to take their issue to the United Nations. So he didn't say African people have to take their issues to the Catholic court system that is oppressing them, but he said take their issue to the United Nations, and that is what I believe on an organization of African how they call it what is it, African Unity? No, not the organization African Unity, but the organization he's born here. It was basically at the same time fighting on taking the issues of African people in the diaspora to the UN. So he didn't believe in African people taking their issues to the court system of the United States. because that was one reason he saw it as unnecessary. So, and that was one reason as well the NAACP failed, because we keep taking our issues to the capital court system that creating a problem for us.
And I would like to add to that. One thing, a lot of people might not agree with this. We have to give the NAACP a lot of credit for their work in the past. Right now it's not the same organization that it was, but they did highlight a whole bunch of black injustices, on our behalf back in the day. Such as a man was lynched yesterday flag that they used to have out, such as voter drives and things of that nature. A lot of time we are so critical of the NAACP, we make it seem like they sold us out since the beginning of time. Now, granted, if they was founded by whites, which it appears to be the case, that's true. You know what I'm saying? W.E.B. Du Bois came from the Niagara movement that helped co-found it, but if you find the original founders of the NAACP, you will find white people. But we don't want to discredit every single thing. But the problem that they have today is, I think as Turney brought up, was they are co-opted by a lot of higher power. It just seems like they basically a subgroup of the Democratic Party, if you ask me. They come around every 4 years. They come up with voting registration drive, tell us to vote, and then we don't hear from the NAACP maybe for another 4 years. So they have been stuck in the past in that regard. So I just think they got to get with the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that's a very great point. That very often we tend to forget that the NAACP in the past was did play a very important role in the anti lynching movement. There's two particular members, Harry and Harriet Moore, that were actually killed. They were members of the NAACP that was part of the voting effort, and they were assassinated. So I think there are positive aspects of the NAACP, especially when you look at the movement in the past, that should be recognized. But one of the big issue with the NAACP is because it was never a movement that was funded and controlled by black people. There was always an issue of the outside control and the outside influence. And W.E.B. Du Bois, why he left the NAACP is when he started moving in a direction of promoting black empowerment and kind of speaking the language that Marcus Garvey was speaking. He was openly talking about self-segregation in the black community. He had to leave the NAACP because that's more of an integrationist type movement than a black empowerment movement. And the other issue too with the NAACP, especially now, it's not a grassroots movement. It's not really connected to what's going on with the masses of black people. And I've had experience with this because the only organization that I've ever had to take a public position against was the NAACP. In my community, we had a situation a few years ago where a lot of students, a lot of black students, rely on a scholarship program to go to certain private schools. And the NAACP was taking a position against that, and they wanted an end to that scholarship program. And then the issue was a lot of the parents were concerned about what would happen to their students because they're relying on these scholarship programs to go to these private schools. And without the scholarship program, then their children will have to go back to these failing public schools with infrastructure that was falling apart. And I tried to reach out to the NAACP on behalf of these parents who were expressing those concerns, and I never heard back from them. As it turned out, whatever court case the NAACP was involved in, it was defeated, and the scholarship program was able to continue. But I mean, the fact of that situation is that the community was concerned about a particular situation, and instead of listening to those concerns, the NAACP took a position which was contrary to what the black masses in my community were expressing. So I mean, just from my experience, I don't really see the NAACP now as being a grassroots movement that's really listening to the concerns of regular working class black people.
If I could just ask a question, this is something I'm not completely sure of, so I'm sure one of the panelists know. Didn't the NAACP didn't they come out against Dr. King? Maybe after he did the speech condemning Vietnam. Was that them?
I don't remember if the organization itself came out against King, but I know definitely there were people within the NAACP who did not support King's position. I think we forget that a lot of civil rights leaders were opposed to King's position on the war in the NAACP. I don't know about the organization's position, but there definitely were individuals in the NAACP that were quiet about the war and that would have preferred King to remain quiet as well.
Okay, and the next organization I think we'll just like to discuss is, in my opinion, in modern times, they may have been one of the most successful organizations, and to the fact that most of them were imprisoned, killed, or ran out of the country, the Black Panther Party. Um, Tony, what's your views on the pros and cons of the Black Panther Party?
The Black Panther Party, like you said, a lot of pros with them. One, the organization really was based in the Black community, and that's something that we, especially today, we can't say. Meaning, the people were directly connected to the community. You could tell that the community was the one that was driving the concerns that the organization pushed. It wasn't an outsider telling the Black community that this is what I think you should be caring about, and so that close connection to the Black community is that why I think a lot of people appreciated the Black Panther Party. I think the willingness to show white society that they're not going to do just what's appropriate in order to get things done, meaning their willingness to have arms and go to the state capitol. That was something that was very shocking to a lot of people. So that willingness to be deviant, you know, showing them that Black people are not just going to lay down, that not everyone is going to go with the, you know, the nonviolent approach. Those are things that I think that are definitely remembered by the Black Panther Party. As far as the issues that led to the collapse of the Black Panther Party, it's kind of the same thing. Number one, I would say more so ego. You know, that was to me the biggest thing, because there was a lot of internal conflicts, particularly with the leaders of the organization, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaveridge. There was a lot of back and forth. And the thing is that COINTELPRO, we know COINTELPRO is what essentially really drove the organization apart. But the COINTELPRO was able to pick up on those sensibilities, the fact that a lot of people did have big egos, or that a lot of people were having negative feelings against other members. And so because of that, they were able to utilize that to essentially lead to the organization's downfall. And I think the most unfortunate thing is that a lot of what COINTELPRO did, it could have been eradicated sometimes with just a cell phone call. Like they would send letters to leaders of the Black Panther Party saying, oh, pretending to be someone else and saying, oh, you know, this, that, and the third, and talking negatively. And that person actually thought it was the person writing them. So, you know, that's something I'm sure we could talk about later when we talk about things that we can learn from the past. Another thing, obviously, COINTELPRO in general, that was a big unraveling of the Black Panther Party. Them planting people in the organization to spy, to lie in court and say that people did things when they did not do them, that people were plotting terroristic things against the U.S. government that were not true. You know, I think that, you know, that's a major entity as to why the organization was unable to do everything that it could have done.
Okay, who wants to chime in on that one next?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think with the Black Panther Party, that's, you know, it's a very complex issue to discuss in terms of when you're talking about the downfall of the Black Panther Party and why the party failed, because I can't think of a Black organization that's faced so many both external and internal issues as the Black Panther Party. And I know in particular, if for anyone who hasn't read Assata Shakur's autobiography, I would recommend it, because she goes into a lot of detail about the different issues that she was seeing within the Black Panther Party in terms of the political education. She said, you know, it wasn't as effective as it could have been, because many people who were joining the Black Panther Party, you know, they were learning about Mao and the Red Book and about Leninism and communism, but they didn't really have a basic understanding about, you know, Black American struggle or Black American history. She said many of the members didn't know about Marcus Garvey or Harriet Tubman. So there's an issue there of, you know, political education. She mentions the egoism. She mentions Huey Newton. Huey Newton, in a sense, kind of turned the Black Panther Party into what you'd call a cult of personality, where he was a supreme leader, and it was almost a situation where you couldn't really say anything critical about, you know, Huey, even if it was constructive criticism. So you had these eternal organizational issues, and then you had COINTELPRO. And on top of that, what people have to realize as well is that the Black Panther Party, and Kwame Ture mentions this in his autobiography, the leaders of the movement really weren't prepared for it to become a national movement. The Black Panther Party started out as a local movement in California, and then it exploded nationally. So there's also an issue there as well that it didn't really start out being a national movement, and when it became a national movement, there was a lot of issues in trying to organize it. So I think the Black Panther Party is it's a very great case study for understanding the pitfalls of building an organization in terms of the internal structure, being prepared, to expand the movement into a national movement, and as well as the external issues with COINTELPRO and infiltration.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a complex situation. I think no other organization has dealt with more obstacles than the Black Panther movement. I believe the Black Panther movement was founded in 1967 in Oakland, and by the time I say around 1971, 1972, it started to started to fall apart. You know what I mean? And I think that just speaks volume to how strong COINTELPRO was. I think it just grew so fast. Because you look at um um what's his name? I'm sorry, Fred Hampton in Chicago. You know what I'm saying? Which is nowhere near Oakland. He had to deal with what's his name? William O'Neill drugging him up in order for the feds to invade his house or whatever. So the Black Panther Party, has so many obstacles, so many spies, so many infiltration, probably more than any other movement.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on the BPP, or we can go to the next organization? Okay. With that being said, one of my favorite ancestors is Malcolm X, Malik Shabazz, and I just always wondered, with him being such a great personality, and people still follow him to this day. Um, where is the Organization of African American Unity? Does it even exist?
Yeah, no, I think there've been multiple. Yeah, I think there've been some attempts to try to rebuild it, but as far as I'm aware, it doesn't actually exist as a functional organization.
Okay, so what do we think was the shortcomings? Was it just it was all Malcolm, and just after the brother was assassinated, was no more leadership there, or what?
I mean, that's essentially what happened because Malcolm came back from Mecca, and he didn't really have a lot of time to build up the organization. So really, there was no infrastructure there. So when Malcolm was assassinated, it fell apart. And I mentioned that before about Garvey. Part of the issue was, again, Malcolm's personality was, such a large and powerful personality that when he was assassinated, there were people that tried to step up and fill Malcolm's place and keep the organization going, but none of them had the personality of Malcolm. So part of it was the personality, and the other part of it was Malcolm really didn't have time to invest in it because I forget exactly how many months it was, but it was only a few months that Malcolm was alive after he came back from Mecca, so he didn't even have an entire year to build that organization. And the other thing that people forget is that Malcolm was also working on the Muslim Mosque Incorporated because he was a Muslim and he wanted to create a separate Islamic organization. So he was trying to build two separate organizations, and he was going to Africa, building connections in Africa. So Malcolm really didn't have the time to build the infrastructure for the OAAU for it to continue after he was assassinated. And it was the added problem of, how do you succeed someone like Malcolm? There wasn't a personality to keep that organization going, and there was no infrastructure in place.
Hmm. I think to piggyback off of what Dwayne just said, a lot of times when it comes to Malcolm, we talk about his pilgrimage to Mecca during the final years of his life. But it's very seldom when we talked about his trip abroad to Africa in 1964, the year before he was assassinated in 1965. He went to several African nations, such as Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania. He met with a lot of heads, such as Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, and people and so on. So You got to remember, he left the Nation of Islam in March of 1964. You know, he was assassinated in February of 1965, so not even a full year. So technically, you can say he didn't really have a chance to really establish the old AAAU because, for one, that final year of his life, he was abroad in Africa for several months. You know, he didn't necessarily come back to the States until about December of 1964, which was 2 months before his assassination. And then when he came back, he joined forces with other civil rights organizations. Remember, the same month in which he was assassinated, he went down to Selma, Alabama, and joined forces and sat with Coretta Scott King while Dr. King was in jail. You know, this happened about 3 weeks before his assassination. So even when he returned to America, you know, he was still getting involved with other civil rights struggles. So by the time, you know, it was his time to start working on the organization, you know what I'm saying, his life was taken away. As Dwayne pointed out, you know, he also had to establish the religious organization, which was the Muslim Mosque Corporation.
Okay, and with that being said, I like to bring it to a current times with everything going on with the George Floyd situation and all of the protests that have been going on for the past month or so. Black Lives Matters is not just a hashtag, but an organization. And who would like to speak on the positives and negatives of BLM?
I mean, I can come in. I can say that I think one of the positive aspect of the BLM is that based on the movement or the actions of the citizens in America here, it have exposed um, the issues that Black people been complaining and Black people been fixing in this country, and not just in this country, but in the Western world, so to speak. The issue of George Floyd was able to bring to light the situation we face in this part of the world, and in a sense that it have gone all around the world, and you can see that it brought some level of attention and some level of understanding of how things have been going on for so long in this country. But where it brings some significant changes, because the change we're talking about here, we are talking about the law. So we are not talking about just getting on the street and bringing attention and making people aware that this is what people are going through. But what we're saying here is the law. We want for the law to change. If the law change, and then we will know that something is taking place, or something have taken place. That's the positive aspect of the Black Lives Matter, because it have exposed to the world the issues African people facing in this country. Because it was not just George Floyd, other terrible incidents have been happening here in this country, but just that George Floyd was one of the incidents that was caught on video, and that was clearly showing to the world, for the world to see what's going on here. But all Africans have been facing worse than George Floyd. Now, the issue of Black Lives Matter is one of those kind of entity or institution that when you are talking about its failures, you have to be very, very careful and precise on what to talk about. The issue here is, if you don't mind, or if you don't care, if you don't be careful, people are going to misinterpret you, because people will not think holistically. What people are going to think here is they will start thinking politically or based on party view, as we can see right now. The organization have been infiltrated in a way that instead of them focusing on the issue of housing problem, on the issue of health system in this country, on the issue of wrongful conviction, on the issue of the mass incarceration, all of those things, the Black Lives Matter, so to speak, advocate are not really focusing on it, or the white liberal are not focusing on it. Instead, they use that as a political issue, making people to believe that the only way Black people situation will be fixed is to vote Donald Trump out of power. And we know that the issue of Black people in this country have been going on for so long, to the extent that Democrats were just in power not too long ago. So the issue here is not about taking Donald Trump from power, or the issue will not be fixed by putting Joe Biden in power. So while liberals have made people to turn their attention away from the real issue and then putting it on voting a Democrat in, or voting Joe Biden in and taking Donald Trump from out. And what they're focusing on here, they are saying that Donald Trump is racist, Donald Trump is more bogus. But sometimes I ask people, do you want somebody who will be, how they call it, who will be against you, who will oppress you, but silent? Do you love a silent weapon, or a weapon that will make noise, so that you will know that this weapon is dangerous for me, than a silent weapon, that will take you to your early grave and stuff? So I tell people, I think you want a weapon like Donald Trump, who will make you aware that they hate you, or who make you aware that this is how they feel about you. So in speaking of that, that's one of the failures, that's one of the problems of the Black Lives Matter movement, because the attention of the issue have been drifted away from the understanding of people.
I want to follow up on what Frank said, which I think was accurate. I think, first of all, if you look at, let's talk about the positive, because I talk so much on my channel about Black Lives Matter. You think I hate the organization. There is a lot of positive, about the movement. Number one, at one point, a lot of people were not talking about Black oppression like they are. And so seeing that we're woke, that's very positive. Having people, some for the first time in their lives, actually feel like they can be involved with Black liberation, that's very positive. Those are things that I think are positive about the organization. Now, where I think the organization has really faltered is just on an organized level. So a lot of people don't really know what the organization Black Lives Matter is. A lot of us are more associated with the ideals of police brutality, but a lot of people have no idea who the actual founders of the hashtag are. And you guys can correct me. My understanding is that it began as a hashtag, and after it kind of caught wind, then the people who started the hashtag said, okay, let's make an organization and make principles about that. But by that time, it was already it already went viral. So everyone already had their own idea of what Black Lives Matter was. And that problem to me, number one, is that, from that point, taking and setting an agenda that a lot of people do not necessarily know about, having things on your website that do not necessarily reflect the issue of police brutality. I think that's just a structural issue, because the movement's just so decentralized. The other problem that we're seeing manifest right now with Black Lives Matter is you're having a lot of people, it's like so early in the movement to me, but you're already having people come up and say, well, we're going to start our own organization, or we're going to start our own. And now you have a lot of the people fighting. Obviously, we see Sean King on the internet like every other week for something. And, my understanding is D-Ray doesn't like him. And then the woman, I don't know their names, who founded Black Lives Matter, they don't like him either. And so it's just like a lot of competing. And again, I think that goes to the structure. It's so decentralized. When you have so many competing factions, how do you actually say what the organization is? And again, I think when a lot of people, I think Black Lives Matter is more of a movement than an organization. I think because people don't understand that, there's a lot of confusion, and just the movement is not built to do something sustainable.
Yeah, I think Black Lives Matter is similar to an organization we were just talking about, which is the NAACP. I mentioned the NAACP has done great work for Black people, which they have. You know, same thing with Black Lives Matter. You know, one thing we appreciate about them is how they highlighted a lot of our injustices the past 4 or 5 years. But you know, the problem with Black Lives Matter is just like the NAACP, it has been co-opted by a lot of outside entities. You know what I mean? It's to the point now when I go to a lot of these rallies, a lot of these marches, you know, first of all, I don't even know if they marches anymore. They look like, with all due respect, circus shows. You know, people just getting, they just want to be seen and just all this other kind of stuff. I don't see necessarily organization going on. You know what I mean? So I just think now they just, you know, as that was just mentioned, you know, it started out as a hashtag, and now it's just becoming this co-op movement who's trying to highlight their own personal agenda. It appears, you know what I mean. So I just think that for one, you know, we have to understand this. There's a lot of organizations out here fighting on behalf of Black people besides Black Lives Matter. You know, I feel like it's very disrespectful that anytime a Black man is killed or police brutality occurs, we focus on the Black Lives Matter organization as if other organizations are not on the front line. So it makes you wonder, you know, that got to make you a little suspicious. Why are they so quick to highlight the Black Lives Matter movement and not some of these other organizations? It's because they have been co-opted and they don't want you to pay attention to the real issue at hand.
Okay. I want to get our brother Dr. P on. He's waiting backstage, so if anybody can check in the private chat, and I provide some instructions on how we can get Dr. P on, because he's having some trouble logging in. I think maybe if it was one less person, maybe he could get in. I'm not sure. With that being said, I want to just go back for a second and make this global and talk about the organization that Brother Malcolm patterned, the Organization of African American Unity after, which is the Organization of African Unity, which is currently the AU, which is an organization that we want to obtain membership from. What happened with the AU, with the OAU? Why did it become the AU, and why hasn't it been more effective so far?
The main issue with the OAU, and we see the same thing as well with the AU now, is because there's no unity among the African leadership and there's no unified vision. So the reason for the name change is because the OAU had developed such a negative there was such a negative view towards the organization on the African continent, and it hadn't really been working as effectively as hoped. So essentially what they did is, you know, try to rebrand, create a different, you know, a name, a different organization, but the issue is still there. And like I said, the issue is there's no unity among the African leadership. So when you had the OAU, you had political leaders like Kwame Nkrumah who wanted a continental unified government. You also had neo-colonial African dictators in the same organization. So it was just you know, very disorganized and very disunified organization, and there's no consistent vision for, you know, Africa. And we see that same issue today on the continent. There's some people on the continent who are still speaking about Kwame Nkrumah's vision for a unified Africa, a united African government, but you don't really see that consistently among the African leadership. There's a lot of neo-colonial puppet governments. There's a lot of corruption. And that's really been the issue for Africa since independence, that the political leadership themselves are really what's hindering the unity on the continent.
Yeah.
Okay,
I get a comment.
that sounds great. Who wanted to go next?
Yeah, I can come in next. I
Okay,
think
go ahead, Frank.
yeah, the Organization of African Unity, it worked for quite a while. I think speaking on that, we can see from March 6, 1957, when Ghana had her independence. And Kwame Nkrumah says that the independence of Ghana is meaningless until all African nations are independent, or until all African nations are free. At that time, you can see that Organization of African Unity was working or was speaking on the issues of Africa and African people. And that went on from 1957 all the way to 1963. So before 1963, the Organization of African Unity was functioning. But 1963 was just a term that was really renowned that, to the African continent and to the African in general, that this is an organization that is in place for the freedom, for the unification of Africa. Now, in 1963, but the thing here again is that as this organization was working to put things in place, we have to understand as well that the colonialist was also working behind the scene, because get in mind, they also study us, they also come to our meetings, and that's one of the areas where we need to stop. If Africa want to gain her full potential, if African people want to see themselves moving and taking full control of their life, of their resources, of their land, of their continent, they have to stop inviting people into their meetings and agenda and whatsoever. Because these people, when the European are having a European or the EU, you don't see African representative. But get in mind that now these people come into our meeting. So the AU was actually functioning and working vigorously for the independence of Africa and for the freedom of Africa. But in 1963, now when they meet to visualize the freedom of Africa and the unification of Africa, by that time the imperialists or the neo-colonialists have already done their job to divide Africa. And I think in most of our videos, Tiani have also talked about that, and in other videos where you have the Casablanca and the Morovia group. Get in mind, the Morovia group was mainly controlled by most of those French, English-speaking countries, places that the French colonized, and other places as well. So before they got that Morovia group already had their agenda in place, not to have one united Africa, but they wanted to have their own separate nations, and they can coordinate. And that did not go well. And that was the beginning of the downfall of the AU, because they were unable to come together. So right after that meeting, there was no solid meeting here again to come back together. And after that, they all went separate until Nkrumah Une problem start coming in. Because mind you, now the imperialists have seen that this guy is the force behind the unification of this continent. So if they do it, we're going to lose control of our access. We're going to lose control of our land. We're going to lose control of everything we control on our continent. So it was from there Nkrumah downfall came in. And then in around 2000, so since that time, after that meeting, the OAU did not really function as it needed to, according to a mission statement. And then in 2000, they tried to, revise it again to take the O out, that, okay, it's not an organization because it is on a continent. So they brought it in as well as making it as African Union again. And that was enforced again by Muammar Gaddafi. And mind you, when the imperialists saw that again, it was against their agenda. So that was one of the forces behind the issue of Muammar Gaddafi being thrown away from, assassinated and overthrown as well. So the AU came in around 2000 to reform, the OAU to move on again with Kwame Nkrumah's agenda of one United States of Africa. And that did not work again after Muammar Gaddafi was killed, because it was being infiltrated again by the same West, and the other African head of state did nothing, but they sat out there again because they were controlled by their master.
Yeah, I think when I think about the OAU, which is now the AU. I think about the decade of the 1960s. I think we underestimate how powerful the 1960s was, not just in America, but on the African continent as well. I think it was started by Kwame Nkrumah when he made Ghana independent back in 1957, because he spearheaded a movement. In the 1960s, you had leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Amilcar Cabral, Patrice Lumumba, Sekou Touré. These are all people within the 1960s. That's just on the continent. Then in the States, you had people like Kwame Touré, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King. So Pan-Africanism was alive and well, and it put a serious threat into the power, into the establishment that be. You know what I'm saying? It put a lot of fear into the black consciousness, to the black awakeness that was going on. This is why, once they started to get rid of some of these black leaders, such as Patrice Lumumba due to assassination, Amilcar Cabral due to assassination, Malcolm X due to assassination, Kwame Nkrumah, he was overthrown. That's where they started to put the puppet leaders in, who would stay in office 10, 20, 30 years and not leave office at all. Some, if not 40 or 50 years. So I still think the AU is still a result of them purposely putting puppet leaders in, because the movement was too strong in the 1960s, and they don't want a duplicate movement to occur in 2020.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of good information. Has everybody chimed in on the Organization of African Unity? If I seem a little distracted, it's because I'm trying to get Brother Charles in. I think I see him now. There he is. Give me 1 second, African family. We have one more panelist that we're adding. Mambo, Dr. P. We've been discussing the various organizations such as the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the NAACP, the Organization of African Unity, the Black Panther Party, and as well as Black Lives Matter. We've been talking about the pros and cons of these. And if you can just chime in and let us know your views on these organizations. And after that, we're going to start going into some more questions about how we as Black organizations can do better.
Oh, okay. Well, somewhat of a disadvantage. Can people hear me? Because I'm getting
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I feel a somewhat of a disadvantage because I didn't hear the comments. So let me start.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were watching us.
No, I wasn't. I was just spending the time trying to get in and being unsuccessful at that. The components of a successful movement, for a potentially successful movement for liberation, include, in my view, democracy, that is, periodic election of organizational leaders, thoroughgoing class analysis, assessing who our friends and who our enemies are, and understanding how each of the representatives of those classes act in different periods, applying the United Front, the Mao Zedong's formulation, and consolidate the progressive forces, win over the middle forces, isolate the diehards. And to give you an idea of how that can work briefly, the Vietnamese used something like 14 different United Fronts in the course of their fight against the French, the Japanese, the French, and then the United States. By the way, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I am an anti-colonial Marxist based on my experiences. And so, and I'm speaking from that framework. So, fully developing the mass movements, thoroughly educating cadre, and mobilizing all possible allies through solidarity, and I think using a scientific socialist perspective to make an objective analysis of what the conditions are. And I think a lot of the time that is something that people bring their subjectivity to the analysis and throws it off. Part of the challenge of asking is asking questions such as, what does victory look like? And how then do we reverse engineer that outcome to understand what the immediate next steps are? So those are some of the thoughts I have about that. I can talk certainly about my experiences in the Black Panther Party, but I've also been part of some multinational organizational formations. Well, I'll stop right there.
If I can jump
Okay,
in.
brother. I appreciate.
That other people cover. Let me ask that.
Can I jump in, Brother Kanata?
I'm
So I
sorry.
would just like to hear from Dr. P, because you were actually a part of the Black Panther Party. We were discussing why we think the Black Panther Party essentially led to what led to its demise. Some of the things we were thinking or conversing about was obviously COINTELPRO. If you could just narrow down to you, what are the big factors that ultimately undid the party?
Biggest single factor was lack of democracy. And what happens is, and this is a Marxist point that I think is important to think about, that the internal is primary, and so if we had an internal flaw, COINTELPRO simply took advantage of that internal flaw to foment rumors and attack people. And then their approach would be to attack one of the most effective people in the chapter. They rumor monger that he was a police agent and so forth. Well, I'll call that snitch jacketing. But the bottom line is that the party tried to respond to that in the wrong way. You're always going to have police agents in your midst, no matter what you do. You should have security, but if you become preoccupied with trying to get all the police out of your organization, then you'll end up making missteps like the Panther Party did. And in fact, just to give you an idea, when Lenin's revolution broke into the Tsar's secret police files, they found that one of the members of the Central Committee of Lenin's Central Committee was a police agent. But he had to function at a high level in order to keep his job, and he wasn't central. I mean, you really have to double, triple check your security, because Fred Hampton, for example, appointed a friend of his as security chief, and that person turned out to be the police agent who drew the maps to tell and inform the police where he was sleeping that particular night, so they could assassinate him.
Wow, that's heavy. A little housekeeping. Somebody in the comments thinks that chirping might be somebody's fire alarm. So if you could step away a little bit and take the battery out, that would help us out. And if you know who you are. Okay. Also, I just wanted to. One of our members, Baruti, is in the comments, and he wants to know if anybody's familiar with an organization called US. The US organization. It was an Afrocentric organization here in the U.S.
Yeah, that was a rival organization to the Black Panthers, and part of the COINTELPRO operation against the Black Panthers was to exploit the tensions and the differences between the US organization and the Panthers.
Yeah, it's quite possible
Oh, okay.
that police agents within the US organization were the ones that executed to assassinated two Panthers in Los Angeles in the battle for control of the the UCLA Black Studies program.
Okay.
And that would be in line with the kind of what happened with Malcolm X, as well.
Okay. So with all of that being said, I'd like to go to you, Dr. P, as far as we'll talk about infiltration and COINTELPRO. What can organizations such as our own, We Charge We Charge Colonialism, or other organizations that exist today, what can we do to try to, I guess you already said we can't get all the police out, but what can we do to just make sure that they don't be successful in thwarting our efforts?
Well, the first thing is on what it is that you're doing. If you're doing only legal things, then then don't let anybody steer you to the contrary. Okay, because sometimes they will take that vantage point of being the most radical in the room. So you can't. That doesn't mean that sometimes it's just somebody's hopped up, got emotions. Their decolonization process, as Frantz Fanon talked about, has them preoccupied. But so you need to be clear on what your goals are and look at people's practice. That's the most important thing. Whatever their practice is, that's what you judge people on. Now sometimes we would say, well, if they're not getting paid, they're missing a trick. But that's not the same as, going on a hunt. Because again, then the guy in Chicago used to accuse other people, that police agent, head of security, was accusing other people of being police agents. That was how he covered himself. So that this whole question of are they a police agent or not, judge people by their practice and demand that they improve their practice. And you appoint leadership, you elect leadership, you make choices of assignments, etc., based on social practice. That's the best way to start guarding. Certainly, there's things to research, but you don't know when somebody got picked up on their trip to Florida and got kids on them, and then they said, well, we'll let you go, but we'll call you when we need you. And then 6 months later, when they're back home, they say, oh, we need you to do this or that. And you don't know that what happened to that person. The record, there's no paper trail that you can determine that. So my advice is not to spend a lot of time worrying. Look at the practice. That's what you can judge.
I'll follow up. I think that a good idea is for organizations to create kind of like a code of conduct. For example, if there's going to be a disagreement, how are we going to hash out the disagreement? If we're going to have a certain department, how many people do we need to balance the power in that department, so that if someone does go a certain way, we'll be able to essentially vote and have some type of means to ensure that that person does not take control over a certain initiative. When Dwayne, me and Frank, we were starting an organization prior to this, and that was our mindset, that we have to essentially assume that whoever we're dealing with could be an agent. And when you assume that up front, it just makes you take precautions that I think, you don't necessarily assume that someone's going to act in the interest of the organization. Now, I do think that over time, you're going to look at people's actions, and then their actions hopefully will allow you to designate some responsibilities to them. But you should, even in designating responsibilities, understand that, as Dr. P said, you don't know what's going to happen to that person down the road. You don't know if they're going to be approached by someone or someone's going to pick them up. So you have to, consciously have that in mind. But like you said, there's nothing you can really do to prevent it. But you can certainly have codes of conduct for how we're going to handle different situations. And I think the best thing that we can do is base it off the past. What was done in the Black Panthers? How are they able to unravel them? What was done in the UNIA? How are they able to unravel the UNIA? What is it that the Nation of Islam is doing to still be intact? That's the biggest question we should be asking, because they've been here for a long time. And not to say that organization is perfect, but one thing you can't say is that the government has been able to throw the NOI, off of actually having an organization that was going to stand the test of time. So those are the things I think that we should be thinking about.
Let me say something to that, because I think that the question of whether an organization is perceived of as a danger that needs to be disrupted, is partly due to whether or not there's a perception that the organization is dangerous to the empire. And I don't happen to think that the Muslims have been seen for a very long time as that. And even there's a lot of militant rhetoric there. But to quote John Heinrich Clark, how do you have a march on Washington to protest yourself? That was what he said about the Million Man March. So, yeah.
I want to add as well with the Nation of Islam, because I mentioned this earlier, that when Elijah Muhammad died, the Nation of Islam, it's split up. There's different factions of the organization. So the faction being led by Louis Farrakhan is the most well-known faction of the Nation of Islam. But when we talk about the Nation of Islam today, it doesn't really exist as the same organization in the 50s and the 60s, because when Malcolm was in the organization, the rhetoric was a lot more militant, a lot more nationalist. And you notice when Malcolm left the organization, a lot of that rhetoric went away. And even under Farrakhan's rhetoric is even less militant and nationalistic than Elijah Muhammad's was, in a way. For example, Farrakhan is not as harsh on the White Devils and that kind of rhetoric. So the organization doesn't really exist the way it was in the past because of the splinters, and also because a lot of it's been watered down over time. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with the controversy with Khalid Muhammad and Farrakhan back in the 90s, and that issue is partly because Khalid Muhammad's rhetoric was too militant even for Farrakhan. So I mean, the Nation of Islam is around, but it's really not the same organization that it was in the 50s and 60s during Malcolm's time.
Even then, it was never anti-capitalist. And
based on what Dwayne said, go ahead, Dr. P. I'm sorry.
It was never anti-capitalist. So that if, and you see, look, they said, okay, it doesn't really matter what the color of the president is, as long as he's making good decisions for the empire.
Right. So I want to talk about handling personalities, because that had a lot to do with things that went on in the NOI and the BPP. How do we handle different personalities and egos and those type of things if an organization is going to grow? Even if with our own organization, as young as it is, we've run into personality conflicts over the months. Some people just think that they're Black Jesus, and everybody needs to listen to them. So how do we deal with personalities and conflicts within the organization so the organization doesn't splinter? Because there's also another organization, there's a Pan-African organization, I'm not going to say their name, that we were looking to work with, and then we find out, they're split in like 3 different directions, So How do we avoid being like that?
Mm. Well, I think for starters, one thing that is killing us as a people, not physically, but just speaking in general, is gossiping. We have to stop gossiping. I see too much gossiping in organizations. I see too much gossiping among so-called friends. I see too much gossiping going on in the workplace. Gossiping is really what's destroying a lot of organization. If you see anybody within your organization talking about another member behind their back, you be cautious of that person. One thing I appreciate about WCC, and I can promise y'all this, I have never seen any gossip, to my knowledge, take place. Nobody ever DM me talking about another member of the organization. And this is what's hurting us when it comes to movement. We talk too much. What Dr. P just brought up, you look at somebody's character to determine whether or not you can trust an organization. Because actions really do speak louder than words. Just like what I found out who Tyranny Cherie was. A friend of mine had a beef with somebody. She did a video about it. And she was just so humble in her approach. And one thing I noticed, she was so consistent. She didn't necessarily belittle people, talk down. She used every opportunity to educate people. So I saw the character of the person, so I knew she would make a good leader. So we have to follow examples because it's easy to talk a good game. I'm not going to say any name, but we know people within this conscious movement who are great orators. They could they can rally up and mobilize people from sunrise to sunset, but they have character issues. You know what I'm saying? We have to have a code of conduct, which was just discussed on this panel, because we just have too many negative thoughts. We are quick to call people agents. We have to follow the workers. Period. You know what I'm saying? And so until we stop this gossiping and just stop this infighting and just spreading rumors, you know, we're not going to make it to the second level like we need to. So I think that's one key element we have to discuss.
Can I throw a nuance in there for everyone to respond to? So obviously, what Jamal, I think a lot of what you're talking about is really because we're just in this age of social media. So how do you deal with that in this age? Because as we see, everyone's constantly on your page. People are constantly sending you things. I just saw today on Twitter, Tariq Nasheed posted the brother, I forget his name, from that new organization, the No Effing Around Coalition, who recently took a really big stand. He had a rally, a peaceful protest, but they were carrying guns at the at a KKK memorial, I believe. So a lot of people were looking at their organization and kind of showing support. And then I just seen Tariq Nasheed posted on Twitter that, hey, I think this guy's an agent. How do we deal with that with social media? Because so many people are so quick to try to get responses out of people that it's really hard to build a movement is what I'm learning. I mean, even if you look at what happened, obviously I don't agree with the ADOS movement, but I think what happened with Tariq and Yvette, that was something that we could really learn from, because that was just an issue of so much access to different opinions from social media, and it just completely derailed, what legitimacy that a lot of people have, because especially if you look at how some of our personalities may be responding to people in very petty ways, like how can you follow someone who would be so petty in public? So I just want to get if anyone's perspectives on that nuance.
Well, you need to actually ask them analytically, what is your evidence? What's your facts that say that you think? That doesn't mean anything. What are your facts? You need to always say, bring the evidence. If there's no evidence, well, if there's no evidence that you shouldn't be talking. And actually,
Okay, I want to move on.
I was laughing because Mao Zedong has this expression. I would encourage all of you to take a look at the Red Book because it's useful. It's printed in. It's probably printed in almost as many languages as the Bible, circulated all around the world. Of course, the Chinese capitalists do not use it now, but there's still plenty of copies around. But he would say, no investigation, no right to speak.
I think we as a people, we lost the ability to think for ourselves. Because as Tyranny just brought up, it's so easy to build a following off of negativity. I could promise you, I could start a YouTube page tomorrow just disrespecting Black people all day. And I bet you by the end of the week, I probably have 10,000 subscribers in 1 week. Just belittling Black people, or just making up lies, or just calling people an agent. See, we live in an age where people think they're conscious. It's going back to what I was just talking about. Can they speak a good game? It's so easy to be an orator nowadays. It's so easy to sound good. But once again, you got to look at what is that particular person doing? What are they actually? What is the work they put in? What is the seed that they sow? You know what I mean? So it's definitely difficult to have a movement because I think it was Minister Farrakhan who brought up how the COINTEL works. It's to cause confusion. So if we have a trust, say I had a trust, let's just say I use Frank as an example. A great intellectual. Let's just say somebody posted on Twitter that he was an agent, and I don't have the ability to think for myself. Now, for example, I'm gonna start looking at him funny, and I'm gonna act, I'm gonna throw confusion out there, and now, I don't want to work with him no more. Just over allegation. It's kind of similar to the Black Panther Party, meaning people would write letters. It would be from the agents or whatever, and they would have picked up the phone and call that person. So a lot of time we have to do the same thing in 2020. We have to speak to one another. You'd be surprised how a lot of things are resolved when we talk. You'd be like, I ain't say that. Then you realize they ain't say that. Then where did this come from? Because best believe the same tactics still go on today. Just like on my page on Facebook, that's live streaming right now. I remember one time somebody accused me of trying to compete with their page. I'm like, what? I created my page before you even had your page. What you talking about? So it's just ego, pettiness. Everybody want to be the chief, but nobody wants to be the Indian. Nobody wants to do the work. You know what I mean? So this is something we have to fix in our community.
Frank, did you want to chime in on that before we go to the next question?
Looks like we just lost them.
Look like we just lost Frank. Okay, get back on, brother, and I'll put you in. The next thing I want to talk about is recruiting competent membership. I mean, we need people to do things. We need IT professionals. We need lawyers. We need strategists. We need public relations people. But at the same time, everybody has to eat. Everybody wants to make a dollar. And when people are working for free, then they're basically donating because that time that they're working for us, they could be getting paid. And so, and sometimes I notice, like, sometimes people will become members of several organizations just so they can offer certain services, and when they offer these services, then they're getting the kickback. They might say, "Oh yeah, we should all use this service," but come to find out, what reason why we all want to use this service is because that person is going to get an affiliation bonus or something like that. So how do we recruit? Now I'll go to Frank first, since he didn't get to speak on the last answer. Frank, how do we recruit competent professionals and get them to donate their time when everybody wants to make money? How do we get people who can actually really get the job done or are willing to do it for their people for free?
I think when we talk about recruitment, especially in an organization like this, a revolutionary organization or institution, number one, it has to be people who believe in the value, who believe in the mission of the organization, and two, people who have skills. Because in every organization you need skills and you need values. So those three things, skills, values, and belief, those are the three things you're looking for in someone to be part of your organization. But a key point here is what? Belief. Somebody who believes in the value, somebody who believes in the ideology of the organization, somebody who believes that even if the head of the organization is no longer, people will be able to overtake the organization, to move the organization forward. So that's the key point. People who believe in the value of the organization and people who believe in the movement of the organization. So those are the three things you're looking for in people, because you don't want to recruit people and one key point again I will add to that is people who are not corrupt and who will not be corrupted. So that's another thing again, you have to be careful in finding somebody who you want them to become member of the organization or who want to become member of the organization. And how do you determine these people? So people, you don't just bring people into your organization. So this is why you have a separate term called what? How do you call it? Orientation. So I would just say orientation. So during that orientation period, it could be 1 week or it could be a month. So that person will be in that orientation session, and that person go through the core value and what you stand for, the mission statement of the organization. If they believe in it, and then you have to give maybe a paper to this person to sign that, okay, by you signing this, you believe that you want to become a member of this organization, and you giving your life to this organization, and you apply your skills and value, and you are not corrupt, and you will not be corrupted by any incentive. Because that's another thing again. Some people want to join an organization based on incentive. So you also want to make sure in recruiting people, you want to ask them those questions too. Are you joining this organization based on incentive, or are you joining this organization based on your belief in this organization, based on your time you want to put in this organization, based on the knowledge you have about this organization leading to freedom, or whatsoever the case may be? So those are the things you want to make sure to find people, not people who want to work with incentive. So in case we are not organizations are based on incentive, and you bring somebody in, or maybe you've been providing incentive, but at some point of time, whatsoever the situation is, you don't have incentive to provide to that person. So that person will then leave the organization. And if that person leave the organization, make sure now you're having a loophole, because that person is now taking the information out to people who are not supposed to be, or to people who are not supposed to get the information that we just spoke about, that Tiani just brought out. And I think you might also talk about it, about gossip. So such people will now go out to go gossip as well. So when you're recruiting people, you make sure and have these value of this kind, like belief, skills, and knowledge, and people who will be committed to the organization, into the organization.
I think the old
Okay,
saying.
Dwayne, I'll direct this follow-up to you. Jamal was about to speak. So how do we know that people possess the skills that they claim to possess? Because as they say, beggars can't be choosy and not lift a gift horse in the mouth. So you can't really ask people for their resume and verify their references. So how do we even know that people have the skills that they claim to possess when they want to join certain committees and do particular things for us?
I think the unfortunate thing about that is the only way to really get some feedback. The only way to really know for sure is to have those people commit to the organization, and at some point they're going to have to demonstrate the skills that they've claimed they had, and if they have those skills, then you'll see it. And if they don't have the skills, obviously they'll be lacking in that department, and you may have to replace them with someone else. But yeah, that's just one of those issues. I really don't see how you'd be able to handle that before the fact. And I mean, one of the challenges with organizations is a lot of times when people are coming into the organization, unless you do a background check or you have a means to do a background check, you have to take people at their word and take them at their word that they have the skills that they're claiming to have. And to me, that's the only way I could see to be being able to handle it. I don't really know, other than, like I said, doing a background check or some kind of investigation, how you'd get around that.
Okay. And when do, probably Dr. P, maybe you can answer this. When should an organization decide to actually spend money on a professional and hire outside help?
That's going to depend on the organization and its needs. I don't think there's any rule of thumb for that. You can have very large organizations that are primarily volunteer based, and then you have some, compact organizations that have have a budget. But I think one of the issues is what are the funds the organization has at its disposal in the first place. So and whether the organization feels it's time to quote professionalize a particular activity instead of just going with a volunteer. So I don't think there's any. It's just it's going to be a per organization, per set of conditions decision.
Brother Kanata, I'm sorry if I can.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I can. No, I wanted to add to that as well. So in doing that, if you want to recruit somebody, maybe based on expertise or based on spending money on a person, then it have to be a skills that is not found within the organization, and you really need that skills or that expertise within the organization. Someone who will come to add to the value of that organization that we don't have. Then in that case, maybe I would say it is advisable to spend on that person. But if it is skill that we already have, we don't really need to spend money, or we don't really need that pricing. But we can only do that if we don't have that skills or that expertise within the organization, and the organization really, really do need it in our point of time or so.
I just wanted to say, just another quick nuance is that another thing that I noticed a lot in the modern age is that a lot of people care about Black issues. A lot of people want to do something in regard to Black movements, but outside of maybe liking a Facebook page or being in a Facebook group, if you try to get a lot of people to commit to things and actual organizing, then a lot of people will say, I have a lot of work to do, or, I can only support. So that's just another, comment I just wanted to put out there, is that I don't know if it's more than in the past, but I definitely think that, a lot of people feel as though they're being in an organization simply by engaging in social media, maybe posting certain videos or something like that, engaging on a social media page, a popular page, something like Black Knowledge that Jamal runs. So, that's just another thing I've noticed. I feel like a lot of people feel like, I've contributed just based off of social media, which I think is a problem.
Well, sis, can you add on to what Dr. P was talking about when we hire professionals? We would need a budget to do that, and we have funds. How do we keep donors from controlling the organization? Just say we need to do something that costs, $500, and everybody's put in $10, but then one person put in 300 out the 500. A lot of times that person say, well, now we got to do what I want to do, or I want my 300 back. So how do we control that type of thing?
You give them their 300 back immediately. So anybody, if you're going to donate to an organization, you donate. It's that you don't get to tell an organization what to do. So I was in the SNCC, and then I was in the Black Panther Party. One of the problems that SNCC had was that it started out in 1960 as a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The SCLC, King's organization, wanted a youth group, but the woman they hired, Ella Baker, said, "Look, you can do what you want," and so they decided to be an independent organization, and that was critical to the course of the development of the civil rights and eventually the Black Power movement. But SNCC's base of income was mostly northern white liberals, and so as it moved toward Black Power, and as it took stands against Palestinian oppression, for example, their money evaporated, and so they became that actually, in my view, had an impact on the political perspective of people that came out of SNCC during the Black Power era. Black Panther Party, in contrast, they said, "Look, give us the money or don't tell us what to do." And if you tried to, Panthers would probably punch you in the mouth. But seriously,
okay. I want to ask.
So no, the point is that you're not going to tell somebody. You don't accept that somebody's going to tell you what to do. Either you give it because you agree, or you don't give it because you don't agree with what the current program is.
Yeah, but because like governments do that as well. They do the same thing to African countries. They say we give you this many millions of dollars of aid every year, but then when there's a certain social policy of that country that relates to their culture that doesn't match with European culture, they say, well, you're going to accept this, or we're not going to give you the aid anymore. And that's what happened to Zimbabwe.
Yeah,
and also I believe, yeah.
Sorry, I was gonna just say, I think that the big thing that we kind of have to do is we have to set reasonable expectations, and I think one way you can do that is to fund with the people. I think cooperativism is one of the things that is a tradition of us as African people. Cooperative economics, communalism, and so when you're talking to the people, I think that once you establish that rapport and trust with them, that you can ask for small contributions. I'm not a fan of taking big contributions. That also means that obviously you're going to have to rely a lot on volunteer work. You're going to have a membership that's willing to do things for free. Luckily, with WCC, we found a number of people who are professionals who are willing to do things for free for us. But I just think that you have to kind of scale it back. We don't have to have a big production coming from the beginning. I'm just a big fan of taking small donations from the people. To get $10, it's something that will give us a lot.
And one thing we have to be mindful of, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say I'm not able to do it. I think a lot of time our pride, somebody presents us with an opportunity, we can say we could do it. That's just like if one of the leaders at WCC asked me to build a website by next Saturday. A lot of people would say I could do it. All I got to do is just look up a Google search and I can put it together. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to saying I'm not skillful at that. I don't know anything about the technology. I'm gonna let that go. You have to be realistic. You know what I'm saying? That's why when I was brought up on board with the WCC or even with FAL before, I was realistic in my approach. I was asked to write a statement every 2 weeks. And to my knowledge, with the exception of 1 week, my grandfather passed away last month. I have honored my commitment to every other week because it was Kwame Ture who said, you should dedicate just 30 minutes a day to a Black organization. You know what I'm saying? So what that I do is purposely 1 hour a week. Literally, it's in my phone. It's in my schedule. I dedicate myself to WCC. So it's not like I could put together an article in like 10 minutes. Within that hour, within a half hour, I type up one paragraph, another half hour, type up another paragraph, move on to the next week, type up another paragraph, and bam. So it comes back down to organization. So how can we have group organization if we don't have individual organization?
Okay, I got an interesting question here. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not going to chime in on it. It's about leadership. We have a question of why do people, organizations hold to traditional leadership, saying, I have this position, this person has this position, that person has that position, instead of like taking the communal approach and rotating more often. Like for instance, we're on committees and we're committed for a year. We're obligated for a year to serve on the committees. But some people think that there is a model, I guess maybe, where we can have new leaders every other week. Does anybody think that's feasible?
No.
That way everybody gets a chance to lead.
It's not. It's. I mean, I think leadership training is critically important, and you should periodically rotate. Depending on your organization, you're going to need a lot of leadership. I mean, the Panthers had most of the Central Committee in jail or exile at points. But they had to rely on other level leadership. And of course, then you have some of that leadership that would have been able to step up from the next level, like Fred Hampton was assassinated because he was actually I think he was the most charismatic of all Panther leadership, regional and national, in his speaking. But yes, you want to provide for leadership training and make sure that because life happens, and I'm sorry about your grandfather, but there are times when things happen to somebody and they can no longer function for a while, and they take some more time to get themselves together. And you have to be able. The organizations have to be able to say, okay, well, we have some other people who train, to do backup, step in. So I definitely think that I don't think that rotating every 2 weeks. You need some time to learn any complex task and refine how you carry it out. But the idea that somebody should have a job for 20 years, or that does not make sense to me.
Okay, does anybody else want to chime back in on that?
Yeah, I think in order to have a well-functioning organization, you need to have a rotational leadership. So in that, you also, because the reason to that is you need a fresh idea, you need a fresh education, or you need a fresh mind. Because the thing here is, like Dr. P just said, I mean, how can somebody serve in an organization for 25 years, for 30 years? It's like you're going to be repeating the same thing over and over. And that organization, it might become boring. And at the end, you're going to find people will be kind of lame by it because they will feel that they do the same thing over and over and over. So they won't have the mindset of thinking beyond the organization. They won't have the mind of there can be new things, there can be new investment, there can be new technology, there can be a new vision, there can be new innovation. So and if you can't have those things in an organization, the organization will always be stuck and you won't see the organization growing. But if you have a rotational leadership, you make sure that there will be new idea, fresh idea, and there will be new improvement within the organization. And you find that in fact that organization will always move forward. And you find that with the kind of age time, with the period we're in now, you find mostly people within your organization, if you can rotate information, or you can rotate information within the organization, or if he can rotate a position, leadership position, if he can make people feel part of an entity, you find out that that organization will do great than people who don't want to, release, power, and they just want to be empowered. So yes, it is very, very, vital in this time period or in this age period to, give our position after serving some number of time based on the constitution of that organization or institution.
Okay, I'm going to mix two questions together, and whoever wants to speak on this can speak on it. I don't think Dwayne spoke on the last one. When it comes to affiliations, and when it comes to also working with others, if I belong to several organizations, of course they don't have all the same goals, or that would just be one organization. You wouldn't be in multiple organizations if they all had the same goals. So if you are, how do you not be compromised through your affiliations, and also how do organizations not be compromised through coalitions?
I think the only way to really avoid that is to start with certain core principles and certain core goals. And I think on that basis, you can form coalitions with different organizations around those goals. But one of the issues that we all often run into with coalitions is trying to build a coalition or trying to build unity among organizations that don't necessarily have the same vision or the same principles. And that's when you start to see disagreements, starting to happen. That's when you start to see divisions come out, and that could even lead to infighting in some situations. To go back to what we were talking about earlier with the Black Panther Party, that was an issue that happened between Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and the Black Panthers at some point, that they had different ideological visions and there was a clash. So what started out as a coalition between the former members of SNCC who had gone over to the Black Panther Party ended up becoming kind of a very bitter public dispute among the Panthers and among Stokely Carmichael over those differences. So I think there's past examples that we could look at to demonstrate the point that coalitions have to be centered around a certain shared ideology, certain shared visions and principles. And I think, frankly speaking, if there's not that shared basis that a coalition can come together, then there's no point in having the unity. And I'm a believer that as much as I'm for Pan-African unity, I think unity just for having unity for the sake of unity is not only useless, but it can be counterproductive. So I think unity needs to be formed around some kind of a shared vision, a shared goal, shared principles, and shared ideology.
Just a little addition.
Anybody else want to speak on that?
Yeah, a SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, came out of a culture of being very democratic, whereas the Black Panther Party was immediately structured from the very beginning as a paramilitary organization, so that the closest that the Panthers ever got, in my experience, was in the case of the Boston chapter, we had the area captain was transferred, and they asked us to do a straw poll for a new one, the new area captain, and so we chose a woman, and they ended up they approved it, and the first woman, Audrey Jones, was appointed to head the Boston chapter of the first of a Panther chapter. So that's my understanding. But we, the Panthers did not have enough democracy, and that's one of the reasons why the split occurred. One of the other pieces to that was when you have different opinions inside an organization, you need that democracy to say, okay, we're all going to vote, and the majority, will determine what direction we go in, and we go off and test that or that direction and see whether or not it works, and then we come back in a couple of years and vote again. So that's an important piece. Having an organization, Congress or whatever especially if you're larger national organization, is critically important. And we're talking about real democracy, not just stacking the deck like some labor unions do. I was in the steelworkers for a while, and during that time, a third of the voting membership of the national convention was appointed by the Senate. So, of course, so they could keep their jobs, right, and control policy.
I do got a question, but
I'm gonna go to the next. I'm gonna try to go to the next question because we're rolling up on 2 hours. So we started at 8 and it's almost 10. So I'm gonna roll to the to another question, and I'll probably just do one question per person unless somebody just really wants to speak. Um, the next thing I would like to know is when dealing with the topic of liberation, do you believe it's best to fight on multiple fronts at once or to focus on the heart of the issue?
Well, I would go ahead.
Okay. I think that you can have like a united front, for example, for a particular purpose, but I do think that it's difficult to like if we're talking about working with different organizations to have like a strong coalition, then that is difficult. But if you're having a united front on different issues, that I do think is effective. One way you could do that, for example, most of us agree that police brutality, I would think a lot of Black organizations are against police brutality, so you can come together for that particular issue. Now, when we come talk about more complex issues, talk about capitalism, when you're talking about colonialism, when you're talking about these more complex issues, are you going to be able to have everyone join in on that same topic? Probably not. So I think it's just knowing who you're dealing with, knowing your audience, and just thinking about the end result. Do we have to have the NAACP inside of every single, thing that we're doing? No, because we know that their agenda is very much watered down from what we're trying to do. So we can maybe unite with them on some things, but on other things, we can stay true to what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. And with WCC, what we're trying to accomplish is an end to the colonization of Africans in the United States.
Go ahead.
Okay. As far as growth, I'm gonna put two. How do organizations as they grow maintain their potency, and how does the leadership stay in touch with the newer members of the organization when the organization starts to become really large? Because I was another problem with the BPP is it got to the point where
we're losing you. Let me just say, since you mentioned the Black Party,
had no idea who.
I can't tell what you were asking.
You can go ahead.
Okay, so with the Black Panther Party, what part of it is the question of regular political education classes. Okay, I was in New Haven, but every Sunday we would go to New York for an East Coast political education class of leadership, for example. Those are the kind of measures you input. You have and everybody used to do political education very often out of the centerfold of the article in the Panther paper, or one of the other articles in it. There was always political education in every chapter, with at least one or two of the articles that were in the Black Panther paper each week. But there's also other common things. For example, when I joined the party, we were not dressed unless we had Mao Zedong's Red Book in our hip pocket, and it proved, from my experience, it proved very useful in focusing focusing cadre on the same issues.
It looks like Brother Kanata was booted out, so I'm going to take over as moderator. But as you said, we're coming up in 2 hours, so let's just do closing thoughts. What can we do? What takeaways can we take from this conversation, and what can we learn from our ancestors, from our freedom fighters, on how we're going to build effective organizations that are going to be lasting? I think if everyone could answer, and then from there we'll wrap up.
Right. I think the main takeaway is that when we look at our history, organizations are they're very dynamic things that vary based on time and location. So one thing we have to understand is what might have worked for an organization in the 1920s or 1960s might not work now. So I think what's important to take away from this conversation that it's one thing to analyze organizations of the past to find out what they did wrong and what they did right and what we can build on. But ultimately, the most important thing to understand about an organization is the only way to really effectively build an organization and to understand what goes into that is to engage in that process, is to start organizations, is to participate in organizations. And it's through that process that you figure out what works, what doesn't work. And as I said, a strategy that might have worked in the 60s might not work now, but the only way to really figure that out isn't necessarily just through studying history and doing research, but actually getting involved in organizations today, finding out what's going on. So I guess for me the main takeaway is join organizations, build organizations, become part of the process. That's really the only way to understand the importance of organizations and how to effectively operate inside of an organization.
I just think that the old saying is true. Actions really do speak louder than words. When it comes to organizing, first and foremost, the struggle we have today is a continuation of the struggle that happened in the 60s. It's the same struggle of our ancestors back in Africa before colonialism. So it's a struggle that goes back centuries. There's no such thing as a new struggle. This is the continuation of our fight that's been going on for decades and decades and centuries and centuries. But as Dwayne just pointed out, we can learn from the past. We also got to make adjustments to get of age. And when it comes to organization, we have to see who's doing the work. We have to. It's so easy to say, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, I could do that. Before you commit to a person, give them a trial period. Study them, study individuals. I use Tyranny Cherie as an example again. Before I got real tight to the work that she was doing, after the first video I saw of her, I saw the consistent pattern after the 10th, 11th, 12th video. And I see the same thing with Dwayne. Dwayne is constantly on Twitter, educating us, writing articles. Same thing with Frank. This is why I think the organization is a marvelous organization. Because trust me, the fact that they got me to join the organization, the fact they got me to join FAL before, we became WCC, is because I saw the action of the people. Because I have ran into so many people who ran games when it comes to this Black liberation struggle, who talk a good game. But a lot of time when the organizing was done, these same leaders would go MIA. Then you have to practice, you have to study people. You have to study consistency. Just like Dr. P said, you got to look at a person's character. And I'm going to say this again. Trust nobody who gossip. If the minute somebody comes to you with a gossip or talking negative about another member of the organization, you be cautious of that person, unless they have overwhelming evidence. Because if you find out something about somebody that has to be discussed, I'm not a gossip. But if you just hear a rumor and you just want to tear somebody down behind their back, you stay away from that person. The old saying is true. If a person gossip to you, they'll gossip about you. I have yet to meet any gossiper in my life that turned out to be okay. You know what I'm saying? Once I see somebody gossip to me, I become fishy of that person. So that's how we got to make our organization strong. Stop falling for petty differences, petty beefs, actually do the work and be patient and it just stay consistent.
Well, I agree with a lot of that's already been said, but I'll just stress the importance of political education and study groups. I think are critically important to continued organizational development.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think everything that have been said, it is all true. And just to add to that, we have to be committed, because when we look at our past leader, those who came before us, who, like Jameer said, what we are going through is not anything new. It's the same thing that our forefather went through. It's the same struggle. It's not no new struggle. But what we can take from them is they were committed to the struggle, they were committed to the movement, and we should know this. We're going to be called a lot of names because we are not part of what it is, what we need to be part of. We are part of different entity. So we should also know that Malcolm X was called an extremist just because he was educating his people, just because he wanted freedom for his people, just because he was fighting the system that we are fighting today. He was called an extremist. We should also know that Dr. King was called a terrorist just because he was speaking the truth to those who he needed to speak the truth to, that they didn't want to hear him. We should also know that Nelson Mandela as well, he was called a terrorist. For some reason, we don't know the reason why they are celebrating him today. The same people that call him terrorist, and they come out today, they are celebrating him. So we should also know this. I mean, we should know that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was also called a terrorist. So this is not something new. All those people, they were committed to their work, and they did not go in for any negative incentive, because they didn't believe in any incentive from anybody, because they wanted freedom, not for only for them, but they wanted freedom for their generation and the next generation to come, as we are in the same struggle today, and where we still fighting for the same freedom they were fighting for. So in closing, we have to be committed and follow no negative incentive.
All right, you guys hit every single point that I could even think of, so I have nothing else to add. Thank you to every one of our panelists. Each of our panelists today are members of WCC, so if you are interested in joining this organization, you can go to wechargecolonialism.org, read our mission statement, read our principles, and see if that's something that you align with. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and we will see you guys in our next live stream.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.